What's up everyone, I'm here today to show you how to make a cosplay helmet using materials from Smooth On Incorporated. So check it out. We're going to begin today by securing our original resin model to a melamine board. We're going to use some hot glue to do this. I'm going to work the hot glue onto the base of the helmet, and after applying the glue, I'm going to press it down onto the melamine board to secure it to the board. Next, we're going to take a small amount of sulfur-free clay, and we're going to work the clay onto the bottom edge of our model where it meets the board. And this is to prevent any liquid rubber from getting underneath the model as we make our mold. The clay that we use here is called Sculptex Soft. Today we'll be making a glove mold using Dragon Skin 10 Fast. This is part A, and this is part B. Dragon Skin 10 Fast is a fast-setting platinum cure silicone rubber. Now it's very important that before we start working with this material, we want to thoroughly pre-mix the part A and the part B. So let's start with part A. We're going to take a clean mixing stick and we're going to scrape the sides and the bottom of the bucket as we go to ensure that we get a thorough pre-mix of part A. We're going to do the same thing for part B. Again, use a clean mixing stick, scrape the sides and the bottom of the bucket as you do this to ensure you get a thorough pre-mix. Now we're going to dispense part A of Dragon Skin 10 Fast into a clean container. We're going to do the same thing for Dragon Skin 10 Fast part B. The mix ratio for Dragon Skin 10 Fast is 1:1 by volume. Now since both part A and part B are translucent white, I'm going to color this material using Silk Pig, a silicone colorant. I'm going to add a little bit of green to the part B, and this will help me to visually see that I get a thorough mix of material when I mix them together. Now I'm going to combine part B with part A. Remember that once part A and part B touch, the pot life begins. Dragon Skin 10 has a pot life of about 8 minutes. You want to thoroughly mix the material and then dispense it into another clean mixing container and mix it again. Remember to scrape the sides and the bottom each time you do this. Using a short trimmed brush, I'm going to stipple the silicone onto the surface of my model. The short bristle length allows me to effectively stipple the silicone onto the surface, and this accomplishes two things. One, it compresses the air off the surface, thereby allowing you to minimize any bubble entrapment in the very first layer of your mold. And secondly, it'll ensure that you get a nice thin layer. So here's our completed first layer. Note that we built a flange around the base of the model. The thinness of this layer is going to capture all of the detail of our original. For our next layer of Dragon Skin 10 Fast, I'm going to take a little bit of Silk Pig Red and we're going to color this layer with the red. Now it's always a good idea to color layers, especially when you're working with a translucent material, to know what areas you've already covered and what areas you need to cover. Now you want to apply this second layer when the first layer is still tacky to get the best possible bond. And I'm going to use a brush technique to apply this layer. Remember to cover the entire surface of your model, including the flange. Here now is the completed second layer. At this point, I'm also going to create some registration keys using Dragon Skin 10 Fast. I've colored it with Silk Pig Blue, and I'm going to pour it into these little 1-ounce containers to create small little registration keys for my mold rubber. I also have a metal strip that I'm going to pour silicone into to create long horizontal strips for registration. I'm going to allow this material to cure up and set it aside for use later in the process. For our next layer of Dragon Skin 10 Fast, I'm going to apply some Silk Pig Blue. Again, just a small amount in a part B colors the material very, very easily. For this layer, I'm also going to apply a thickening agent. This will allow me to thicken the silicone significantly so I can cover undercuts in my original model. I'm going to use a material called THI-VEX. Now, THI-VEX is a thickening agent for silicone. It only takes a few drops of material to significantly thicken the silicone. So when I mix this into my mixture, you can see here that the silicone is significantly thicker. Now, I'm going to apply this thickened silicone using a mixing stick and apply it directly to those areas where I need to cover the undercuts in my original model. And I'm going to continue this process until I've covered all of the undercuts in my original. Here now is our completed thickened layer of silicone. Notice that we've covered all of the undercuts in our original model. At this point, we're also going to apply our registration keys that we poured earlier. Now we're going to position these keys around the surface of the mold rubber to help hold the mold rubber in place when we put our support shell on, and this will prevent any movement of the rubber when we cast into it. Now I'm applying these keys when the thickened layer is still tacky, and that's what's holding the keys in place when I press it on the surface of the mold rubber. It's important to note that the keys should be tapered so that the narrow edge of the keys are towards the surface of the mold rubber. The wider part of our keys are outward, facing the shell. And this will help anchor the rubber into your support shell and prevent the rubber from sliding out of the shell when you cast into it. We're also going to apply our strips of silicone rubber, again to help with the registration of our mold rubber into our support shell. You can never have enough registration keys, and so by doing this, it will again prevent any unwanted movement of the mold rubber in the support shell, and will help lock our rubber into place so that it will prevent any distortion when we cast into our mold. Okay, so now we have all our registration keys in place on our mold rubber, and we're ready to apply our final coat. For our final coat of Dragon Skin 10 Fast, we're going to apply a layer of red silicone onto the mold rubber. Dragon Skin 10 Fast does cure in about 75 minutes. So here is our finished layer, and we're going to let that cure. Once the mold rubber is cured up, it's time to trim the flange. Using a straight edge, I'm going to cut the flange about 2 to 3 inches away from the base of the mold rubber. This will help to register the mold rubber to our support shell. I'm also going to trim the corners to give the mold rubber a unique shape that will sit in the support shell exactly the same way every time I use it. Here now is the completed mold rubber ready for our support shell. Now what we're going to do is we're going to build a 2-part support shell. The first step in building this is to mark off a parting line on the surface of our mold rubber using a black marker. This parting line will indicate the line that's going to serve as a guideline for me to build a temporary wall or clay shim, which will support the first half of my support shell as I build it. So now we're going to work with some water-based clay. The clay is going to be positioned along the parting line that we marked off on our mold rubber. We're going to work this clay up along that line to build a clay shim. The purpose of this clay shim is to basically support the first half of our support shell And to prevent the clay shim from collapsing as we build on it, we're going to apply some clay arms to the back side of the shim. This is what the completed clay shim should look like. Notice on the back side of the clay shim we've got some clay arms built into the back side for support, and this will make the clay shim strong enough for us to work with when we build the first half of our support shell. Now we're going to apply some Sonite wax. Sonite wax is a paste wax, and the purpose of applying this wax is to prevent adhesion of the support shell to the mold rubber and the clay shim that we just created. So we're going to apply Sonite wax to the entire surface of the mold rubber, the clay shim, and the baseboard of our entire assembly. For our support shell material, we're going to use freeform air. This is part A, and this is part B. Freeform air is a two-part epoxy putty that cures to very lightweight resin. The mix ratio is 1:1 by volume, and you're going to mix it by hand. Check it for consistency and make sure there are no white streaks. You want to mix it until you get a uniform light gray color, like so. We're going to apply freeform air onto our mold rubber and mix up and apply material as needed to create the first half of our support shell. Freeform air can be smoothed by hand using a little bit of water, so I've applied a little bit of water to smooth out the surface texture of my support shell. So now here's the completed first half of our support shell, and we're going to let the freeform air cure at room temperature overnight. Once the first half of our shell is cured, it's time to remove the clay shim from our mold rubber, and we'll begin the process of setting up for the second half of our support shell. Again, we're going to apply Sonite wax to all surfaces, including the mold rubber and the baseboard, making sure that the Sonite wax dries before we apply freeform air epoxy putty to build our second half of our support shell. Once the Sonite wax has been allowed to dry, it's time to apply the freeform air. We're going to mix and apply freeform air as needed to create the second half of our support shell. Here now is the completed second half of our support shell. We're going to now allow this to dry overnight. Now that our support shell is completely cured, it's time to remove the support shell from the baseboard. I'm going to use this hammer and chisel to do just that. I'm going to work the chisel around the base perimeter of the support shell to release the support shell from the baseboard. Now I'm going to take a smaller chisel and I'm going to work the chisel into the top part of the support shell to separate the two halves. Now we're going to apply a little baby powder to the surface of our mold rubber. The purpose for the baby powder is to help relieve the surface tension on the mold rubber and will allow for the silicone to slide easily against itself as we demold this glove mold from our original model. So now we've applied the baby powder, we're going to gently roll the glove mold up from the base of the model and invert the mold as we remove it. to demold our original model. Now I'm going to prepare our support shell for reassembly. Now to do this, I'm going to first mark off points on the support shell where I'm going to pre-drill some holes along the flange of the support shell. This will enable me to use an anchoring system to secure both halves of my support shell when I'm ready to cast into it. Using a handheld drill, I'm going to drill out holes through the flange of my support shell. This will be where I will anchor the two halves of my support shell with some bolts to secure both halves together when I cast into it. Now it's time to reseat the mold rubber into the shell. I'm going to lay the first half of the shell onto its side and reposition the mold rubber in place. Note how the cut flange fits perfectly within the shell. You also want to make sure that you push in the registration keys carefully into the shell to make sure that it's locked in place. So when you are reassembling your mold, you want to make sure that you thoroughly check each one of those registration points and make sure it's locked into the shell before you cast into it. To anchor my shell, I'm going to use some wing nuts and bolts to secure both halves of my support shell together, and this will hold the entire assembly tight when I cast into my mold. And here is the assembly put together with the bolts in position. Our mold is now ready for casting. Tune into part 2 to find out what materials we use from Smooth On to make our helmet.